Nicole thought that after the devastating storm of her marriage with Ted, peace had finally come as a belated reward for years of being suffocated by lies. She left the cold mansion where she had witnessed so many lies and found herself again in the arms of Cartlon, a man who was once just a shadow in the past but now became the warmest shelter. Amidst the emotional scars, Cartlon brought a sense of security and calm, something she had never experienced in her marriage with Ted. However, that peace was as fragile as the early morning mist, and Nicole knew clearly that it would not last forever when the secret she buried deepest in her heart remained like a knife that had not been pulled out. It all started from a distant night, a time when the line between passion and mistake was only a breath away. Before marrying Ted, she and Cartlon, then his best friend, had a short, impulsive night, but so heavy that both chose to bury it as an illusion. Nicole had told herself it was just a drunken stupor, that her heart belonged to Ted. But as the years passed, in the eyes of Martin, the child she and Ted had raised together, Nicole gradually saw something that sent a chill down her spine. That look, that smile, that walk was not Ted's. The doubt grew like a ghost. She had forced herself to forget many times, tried to believe that maternal love was stronger than anything. But the more she tried, the more haunted she became. When Cartlon entered her life again, as a lover, the familiar lines on Martin's face were like a mirror reflecting her guilt. She felt every cell in her body tremble. Between kisses and words of comfort, she could no longer hide from the truth. Martin was not Ted's child. When Nicole confessed, Cartlon stood still. His eyes, once gentle as a river, suddenly became eerily still. In that moment, without a scream, Nicole knew she had just destroyed everything. The man who once brought her peace was now thrown into chaos. He loved her, but that love was immediately drowned by the harsh truth. He had unconsciously betrayed his old friend, betrayed himself. Cartlon left without a word. Nicole felt a huge void swallowing her. She wondered if he would believe her, or would he ask for a DNA test to find the truth. That thought was like a sharp knife cutting into her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cartlon standing in the middle of the room, holding the test results, his eyes a mixture of pain and contempt. She knew if that happened, there would be no turning back. But worse, if he did not verify and chose to believe her, then that love would become another tragedy. A trust built on the sand of lies, which could collapse with just a small breeze. Meanwhile, Ted, her ex-husband, still watched her life with a cold gaze. He never gave up easily. Divorce from Nicole didn't calm him down. It only fueled a long-suppressed anger. As rumors began to spread, that Cartlon was constantly around Nicole, that Martin was growing more and more like Cartlon, Ted began to suspect. He hired someone to track him down, to collect bits and pieces of his past. And then one night, he found an old photograph, a seemingly meaningless moment, but in which Nicole and Cartlon looked at each other with undisguised eyes. Ted's rage exploded. He was no longer the man who loved her, but a man stripped of everything: love, honor, children. In his mind, everything was distorted. He didn't want divorce anymore. He wanted control. He wanted revenge. Nicole couldn't be happy. Cartlon couldn't be at peace, and Martin, the innocent child, was a tool in that plan. Ted hired lawyers, spread rumors, threatened to sue for custody, and in the long nights, convinced himself he was doing it for love. Nicole was terrified. She knew Ted well enough to know that when he was silent, he was ready to act. Every time she received a strange call, she felt her heart constrict, fearing the day the truth would be revealed. She tried to contact Cartlon, but he avoided her. Elsewhere, Cartlon was tormented, caught between two fires, trust and fear. He sent in a DNA sample, knowing that any result would destroy him. The days waiting for the results were torture. He didn't sleep, didn't eat. His mind was torn between images of Nicole crying and memories of Ted, who had once considered him a brother. When the envelope with the results was opened, Cartlon couldn't breathe. The cold words confirmed what Nicole had said. Martin was his son. The happiness that should have come wasn't there. Only guilt. He looked at the baby's picture, her innocent smile now laced with a tragedy he could not erase. Cartlon knew that no matter how much he had loved Nicole, that love was now in ashes. It didn't take long for Ted to find out. Maybe it was from Cartlon himself or someone else who had accidentally let it slip. But instead of exploding, he chose silence. Silence was more terrifying than any scream. He went to Nicole not to apologize, not to forgive, but to put her in a position she couldn't escape. He talked about Martin, about fatherhood, about honor, and behind every word was a cold calculation. If she didn't come back, he would go public, make Cartlon lose everything: career, reputation, life. Nicole saw in Ted's eyes the thing she once loved, but now it was only cold ash. She didn't recognize the man anymore. Between two paths, silent suffering or resistance, she chose silence. But that silence pushed everyone deeper into the abyss. Cartlon leaves town. Ted begins his legal battle for custody of Martin, and Martin, ignorant of adult drama, feels his world falling apart without anyone explaining. On the last night, Nicole sits alone in the empty house, the DNA test in her hand. Rain falls steadily outside the window. She understands that there is no way out that will save everyone. She made the wrong choice from the start, and now each of them must bear their part of the truth. She burns the paper, watching the flames consume each word. But even as the ashes fly away, the secret remains, imprinted in each of their hearts. Will Cartlon return to claim his son? Ted will never forgive. And Martin, flesh and blood of all three, will grow up amid the fragments of silence. Nicole knows that there are mistakes that cannot be redeemed by tears, and there are secrets that, when exposed, will destroy everything, even the last belief in oneself. In that absolute silence, she realized the greatest punishment was not losing the one you love, but living on, knowing that you made it all fall apart. How will Martin face it? Ted couldn't remember exactly when he started being silent. Maybe it was from the moment Nicole confessed, or maybe even earlier, from the night he saw the strange sparkle in her eyes when Cartlon walked into the room. Silence had long since become the only cover he could maintain for himself. Every morning he still made coffee for Martin, still smiled when she talked about school, still played the role of the father everyone admired. But deep down, he knew every action was an elaborate lie. Who was he protecting? Martin, from the truth, or himself, from admitting that everything in his life was fake? Nicole avoided his eyes every time they met. There was no longer anger or resentment between them, only a void as thick as dust that could not be wiped away. She had no idea how much Ted knew, and it left her in a state of silent panic. She looked at Martin, trying to find traces of Cartlon in his face, but then discovered that every expression, every little habit of her daughter had the shadow of Ted, the man she had betrayed, the man she had believed she no longer loved. It was this contrast that made her feel like she was living in a velvet prison, where each day was a slow cut. Cartlon, since Nicole's confession, had lived in a state of limbo between instinct and guilt. He could not hate Nicole, because that confession was the only expression of honesty in this relationship full of lies. But he could not love her like before. Something inside him was broken, something that made him want to protect Nicole and leave her forever. He tried to avoid Ted, avoid Martin, avoid himself. Sometimes, in his dreams, Martin called him father. The voice woke him up with a guilty jolt. He began to suspect that he was the most despicable of all, the one who had entered someone else's life, sowing a truth that no one else had the courage to endure. As time passed, silence became a form of violence. No one spoke, but every look, every gesture contained 100 accusations. Nicole began to lose sleep. Every night, she heard the clock ticking in the empty room, a reminder that all secrets would eventually be brought to light. She knew Ted was not a forgiving person. His silence was a sign that he was waiting not for her to explain, but for a chance to strike back. She was not afraid of Ted's anger. She was afraid of his calm. Because she understood, when a man like Ted chose to remain silent, it meant he was preparing a cold and irreparable blow. One afternoon, Martin accidentally found an old envelope in Ted's drawer. It was an unsealed DNA test, with only her and Carlton's names on it. She didn't understand anything, just a vague fear. When Ted discovered she was holding the envelope, he stood still for a long time. In that moment, he realized that all his calculations, silence, repression, control were meaningless. The truth, like a long-held animal, always finds a way to escape. He looked at his daughter, saw in her eyes the image of a man he no longer recognized. He was not a kind father, but a coward who chose silence over protecting the truth. Martin hadn't opened the envelope yet, but she sensed that something was very wrong. From that day on, she began to look at people differently. Nicole sensed the change. Her child's eyes were no longer innocent, but heavy, as if they were examining her. She knew, Ted knew, Carlton knew, and now her daughter was starting to know. Everything she had tried to hide was slowly falling apart, piece by piece, and there was no way to fix it. Carlton came back one last time, saying he needed to leave at least for a while. Nicole didn't keep him, because she knew love couldn't survive on the ashes of lies. When Carlton left the house, she sat alone in her room, looking out the window, where the pale sunlight of the day was covering the old garden. She realized she had never really loved him. What she had sought was not love, but a place to escape from guilt. Peace with Carlton was just a sedative, helping her forget the fact that she had never dared to face herself. Ted sat in his office, looking at the test results that Martin had not opened. He was no longer angry with Nicole. The anger had turned into something else, calm, cold, and no longer explosive. He didn't want Martin to know, but he didn't want to keep the secret forever. He understood that his silence wasn't protection, but a form of cowardice. But if he spoke out, everything would collapse. He was stuck between two choices, truth or peace. In the end, he chose neither, just let everything go, as if nothing had ever existed. Martin, unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere in the house, secretly opened the envelope. He read the results without understanding them, but clearly felt that everything around him was changing forever. He looked at his mother, looked at his father, and felt like he was living between two strangers. He didn't cry, he didn't get angry, he just kept silent. It was that silence that made Nicole collapse completely. He understood that the greatest punishment didn't come from Ted, but from the empty eyes of his daughter, the child she once believed she could protect at any cost. He wasn't angry, nor did he feel sorry. He only realized that between them, the only thing left was a kind of distorted feeling, a torn string that still connected the two of them with memories that could not be erased. Although, in the past he also made a mistake when he had a child with another woman, and moreover, the last time he once again betrayed Nicole when he was drunk, he might have confused Leslie and Nicole. He understood that forgiveness no longer had any meaning, just as hatred could not help him find anything. In the end, he chose to leave the house, leaving everything behind, as a way to say that sometimes the only punishment was to continue living with things we could not forget. Nicole still sat in the old room, the light coming through the curtains, covering her tired face. She no longer cried. She knew the peace she had been looking for never existed. It was just an illusion of a woman trying to believe that she was still loved. And in that moment, as the clock chimed again, she realized, the truth doesn't kill. It just exposes everything people try to hide. Peace, love, forgiveness, all are just thin shells covering a simple reality. No one can escape themselves. Carlton didn't know how long it took him to understand that Nicole wasn't lying. The truth started out as a small scratch, but the more he tried to forget, the more it spread, bleeding. He had thought he could leave her, leave everything behind, but when he saw Martin, when he recognized the slight curve of her lips that was exactly like his own, he knew he couldn't. There was an invisible string pulling him back, not because of love, but because of something more primal, paternal instinct. Since learning he had a child, Carlton had been living in the fog. He began to watch Martin from afar, without letting anyone know. He watched her go to school, laugh with friends, hug Ted, the man he once called a friend. Every time he did, a vague pain surged through his chest, an undefinable pain. He knew he had no rights, no place. He was the latecomer, the destroyer, the one whose existence had derailed the trajectory of an entire family. But deep down, he wondered, was it fair that he had a child that the whole world pretended wasn't his? Cartlon began to think about getting Martin back. Not as a lawsuit, but as a way to make amends, to let her know he existed, to know that at least one person had wanted to be there for her. But every time he imagined Martin looking at him, he saw Nicole's eyes that knew it was too late. He knew that if he came into Martin's life, he would take away the only thing that remained intact from her, the father figure she trusted. And he was afraid that, in trying to do the right thing, he would become the cruelest person of all. Nicole knew Cartlon was tormented. She felt Ted's eyes too cold, distant, but filled with absolute control. She knew that Ted knew everything. He could be silent, but he never forgot. Every day, when he walked Martin to school, when he smiled at Martin, Nicole saw in that smile a deadening resignation. Ted no longer loved her, but he still loved the child. And that was why he hadn't destroyed everything. His silence wasn't altruistic, it was a kind of slow revenge, where she had to watch him get better every day, while she herself slowly decayed. Martin avoided all three. She didn't look at Nicole, didn't tell Ted, and didn't go to Cartlon. She didn't know who to hate. It was all her fault, and because of that, no one could apologize. She felt robbed of her right to be herself. Every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't know which face was real. Ted's child, who loved her with all his heart, or Cartlon's, who didn't know she existed until it was too late. Cartlon tried to find Martin, but he avoided her. He was afraid of him, afraid of the questions he didn't have answers to. He was afraid of seeing eyes like his own, afraid of feeling lost in front of a man whose blood flowed through his veins, but who was a complete stranger. When Cartlon realized that, he knew he was too late. No fatherly love could be built on lies. He wanted to protect Martin, but Martin had grown up and needed to be free from all of them. From Ted, from Nicole, from himself. Ted, meanwhile, was no longer angry. He just felt empty. He knew he had lost everything, not just his wife, but also the child he had believed to be his own. But he did not regret his silence, because in that silence, he had kept the only thing he could, the memory of true love, even if it was only an illusion. He knew that if Cartlon tried to win Martin back, he would fight not to win, but to keep what little dignity remained in this rubble. Nicole watched everything fall apart. She wanted to apologize, but every word was now a dagger. She knew that no forgiveness was big enough to save her from Martin's eyes. And the cruelest thing was that, in her son's pain, she recognized the image of herself in the past, the woman who betrayed because she could not bear the feeling of being forgotten. What would be the outcome? Would there be a shocking reversal? For example, if there had been a mistake in the outcome, for example, would Nicole tell the truth? Was Cartlon really her father? Or was he just an illusion Nicole created to avoid feeling abandoned? Could the old test results be changed? Or did Ted keep silent not out of fear, but because he knew the truth was different from what Nicole believed? Did Ted know that Martin was actually his son, but chose to let everyone believe otherwise, out of love? Or did Nicole create the story to hide a deeper fear, the fear that she had never been truly loved? And was Cartlon, who disappeared from everyone, truly innocent, or simply the only one who dared to escape the spiral of lies?